Gaur, the forest giant and the tallest cattle on Earth. When you see one in person, the sheer scale makes you stop breathing. Gaur stand nearly 7 feet at the shoulder, taller than most doorways, with bulls weighing up to 2,500 kilos. That's heavier than most cars. They have a distinctive ridge of muscle running along their spine that creates a prominent hump, and their legs are marked with white stockings that stand out against their dark brown or black bodies, like nature decided this mountain of muscle needed racing stripes. These animals live in the dense forests of South and Southeast Asia, places where most creatures this size would struggle to move. But gaur are surprisingly agile, crashing through thick bamboo forests like the vegetation isn't even there. They're social animals, living in herds led by a single dominant male, and their hierarchy is maintained mostly through displays and posturing rather than constant fighting. When bulls do clash, though, the sound of their horns colliding echoes through the forest like gunshots. You can hear dominance being settled from a mile away. Here's what's remarkable. Even tigers avoid healthy adult gaur. A full-grown gaur is simply too large and too dangerous for most predators to risk attacking. Only the very old, very young, or sick individuals face serious predation. Their deep bellowing calls can be heard for miles, a sound that's both haunting and powerful, especially in the misty mountain forests they prefer. But gaur face serious challenges. Habitat fragmentation is isolating populations, making it harder for herds to find mates and maintain genetic diversity. Disease transmission from domestic cattle poses a constant threat, since they share grazing areas in some regions. Climate change is reducing forest cover, pushing gaur into smaller and smaller territories. Despite their size and strength, they're vulnerable to poaching, with their meat and horns prized in illegal markets. What makes gaur truly special is how they shape their environment. They're forest architects, creating trails through dense vegetation that other animals use, spreading seeds in their dung, and maintaining clearings through their grazing patterns. They're not just living in the forest, they're actively building it. Banteng, the elegant athlete of Asian wild cattle, and honestly, one of the most beautiful bovines you'll ever see. Banteng are smaller than their gaur cousins, weighing between 600 and 800 kilos. But what they lack in size, they make up for in grace. Males are glossy black or dark chocolate brown, with a sleek coat that almost shines in sunlight, while females are lighter brown or tan. Both sexes have distinctive white stockings on their legs and a bright white rump patch that makes them instantly recognizable. Their horns curve upward in elegant arcs. Watching a banteng move through Southeast Asian forests, you understand why they've been called the most beautiful of all wild cattle. But beauty hasn't protected them. Banteng are critically endangered, with only 5,000 to 8,000 individuals remaining in the wild across fragmented populations in Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia. They face heavy poaching pressure throughout their range, hunted for meat, horns, and simply because they wander near agricultural areas. Domestic cattle interbreeding is contaminating their genetics, and agricultural expansion is destroying the forests and bamboo groves they depend on. What makes banteng special beyond their appearance is their adaptability. They can survive on poor quality forage better than most other cattle, browsing on tough vegetation that gaur or buffalo would ignore. Females are particular about choosing mates, observing elaborate sparring displays between males before making their selection. Banteng have been successfully domesticated on the island of Bali, where Bali cattle are a distinct domestic breed still used in agriculture today. Wild banteng are naturally shy and quiet, often disappearing into dense vegetation before observers even know they're there. They live in small herds, usually fewer than 20 individuals, and are most active during early morning and late evening to avoid the tropical heat. This is one of the most endangered wild cattle species, a fact that should alarm anyone who cares about biodiversity. The banteng is a reminder that being beautiful, adaptable, and non-aggressive doesn't guarantee survival when human activity reshapes the landscape. Kupre, the ghost cattle, and possibly the most mysterious large mammal on Earth. Kupre were only discovered by Western science in 1937, which is astonishingly recent for an animal of this size. They stood about 1.7 meters at the shoulder with long legs, a large dewlap hanging from their throat, and distinctive lyre-shaped horns that swept backward like ancient Greek instruments carved from bone. But here's the heartbreaking part. Kupre might already be extinct. The last confirmed sighting was in 1988 in Cambodia, and despite surveys, camera traps, and searches over the past few decades, no one has found definitive proof they still exist. War in Cambodia during the 1970s and 1980s devastated both the habitat and the few remaining populations. Landmines still litter former Kupre territory, making comprehensive surveys dangerous even today. The species was never bred successfully in captivity, which means if they're gone in the wild, they're gone forever. Kupre were so rare that basic aspects of their biology, diet, behavior, and social structure remain almost completely unknown. We have a handful of photographs from the 1960s, some skulls and horns in museums, and scattered historical accounts. That's essentially it. Some scientists hold out hope that small populations might survive in remote, unexplored forests along the Cambodia-Laos border, areas so isolated that large animals could theoretically go undetected. Others believe the species quietly went extinct decades ago, another casualty of human conflict and habitat destruction. Cambodia considers the Kupre its national animal despite the likely extinction, a symbol of what the country lost during years of turmoil. What makes Kupre truly tragic is that this species might have disappeared before we ever really understood it. We never learned how it lived, what ecological role it played, or what made it unique among wild cattle. The Kupre represents the ultimate conservation failure, losing something before we even knew we should protect it, and possibly losing it so completely that we'll never know for certain if it still walks the earth or vanished forever into the forests of Southeast Asia. Wild yak, the mountain king, living higher than almost any other mammal on Earth, where the air is so thin most animals would collapse from oxygen deprivation. Wild yaks inhabit the Tibetan Plateau at elevations between 13,000 and 16,000 feet, a landscape of brutal cold, howling winds, and endless snow. They weigh up to 1,000 kilos and are covered in long, shaggy hair that reaches almost to the ground, creating a curtain of insulation against temperatures that regularly drop to 40 degrees Celsius. They look like they're wearing floor-length coats made entirely of survival. Their bodies are engineered for altitude. Wild yaks have enlarged lungs and hearts compared to lowland cattle, and their blood carries oxygen more efficiently, similar to how high-altitude human populations have adapted over generations. When water sources freeze solid, which happens often, yaks simply eat snow. They can survive for days without liquid water, getting moisture from ice and the sparse vegetation they dig out from under snowdrifts. But wild yaks are critically endangered, with only about 10,000 individuals estimated to remain. Domestic yaks outnumber them roughly 95 to 1, and genetic mixing between wild and domestic populations threatens to erase the pure wild bloodline entirely. Climate change is reducing high-altitude habitat, pushing them into smaller and smaller ranges on the Tibetan Plateau. Increased human activity, roads, mining operations, and tourism are fragmenting their territories. What makes yaks truly remarkable isn't just their altitude adaptation, it's their complete cultural integration with Tibetan life. Yak milk, meat, fiber, leather, and even dung for fuel have sustained human communities in one of Earth's harshest environments for thousands of years. Wild yaks have almost no natural predators except wolves, and even wolves struggle to take down a healthy adult. Watching a wild yak stand against a blizzard at 15,000 feet, completely unbothered by conditions that would kill a human in hours, you're witnessing an animal living at the absolute edge of what's biologically possible for a mammal of that size. African buffalo. Africa's most dangerous herbivore, and that's not an exaggeration. It's a warning. Cape buffalo have a reputation among hunters and wildlife experts as unpredictable, intelligent, and capable of holding grudges. They weigh up to 900 kilos, and their horns fuse at the base of the skull to form a thick protective shield called a boss, basically natural armor across their forehead that can deflect bullets. These animals travel in enormous herds, sometimes over 1,000 individuals, moving across the savanna like a living avalanche. And here's the thing. They remember. Cape buffalo have been documented tracking and ambushing hunters who wounded them days earlier, waiting in thick brush and charging from behind. They're part of Africa's Big Five, not because they're rare, but because they're one of the most dangerous animals to hunt on the continent. Lions know this too. A healthy adult buffalo can gore a lion to death, and herds have been seen returning to rescue injured members, forming protective circles, and actively driving predators away. Their social structure is surprisingly democratic. Herds make decisions by voting with body language, facing the direction they want to travel until consensus forms. It's democracy in action, bovine style. Cape buffalo also host oxpecker birds on their backs in one of nature's famous partnerships. The birds eat ticks and parasites while getting an easy meal and mobile perch. Their challenges are mounting, though. Diseases like rinderpest have devastated populations in the past, and habitat corridors are shrinking as human agriculture expands. Climate change threatens water sources they depend on during dry seasons. But for now, the Cape buffalo remains what it's always been, a herbivore that predators genuinely fear, an animal smart enough to coordinate revenge, and a reminder that plant eaters can be just as deadly as carnivores. Tamaraw, the island survivor, existing nowhere else on Earth except the single island of Mindoro in the Philippines and fighting extinction every single day. Tamaraw are small, standing 100 to 105 centimeters at the shoulder and weighing between 200 and 300 kilos. They're stocky and powerful despite their size, with thick V-shaped horns that point upward and backward. Their coat ranges from dark brown to gray-black, and they have a reputation for being surprisingly aggressive defenders of their territory, despite being smaller than most other wild cattle. Here's what makes their situation terrifying. There are fewer than 600 Tamaraw left in the world, all confined to 2 small locations on Mindoro Island. That's it. The entire species could be wiped out by a single typhoon, disease outbreak, or habitat disaster. They're critically endangered, and their habitat has been reduced to a fraction of what it once was, due to agricultural expansion, logging, and human settlement. Historically, farmers viewed Tamaraw as pests that damaged crops, leading to hunting that decimated populations. Disease transmission from domestic cattle poses a constant threat since the 2 species share grazing areas near village boundaries. What makes Tamaraw special beyond their precarious existence is their status as a national symbol of the Philippines. They're the country's national animal, featured on currency and government emblems, representing indigenous wildlife and conservation efforts. Tamaraw are also a prime example of island evolution creating unique species, animals that exist nowhere else, and can't exist anywhere else because they're so specifically adapted to their environment. Conservation programs are showing slow, fragile success, with populations gradually increasing under intense protection and management. But every Tamaraw alive today carries the weight of representing an entire species teetering on the edge. One island, one species, one chance to prevent extinction. That's the reality for the tamaraw, lowland anoa, the miniature mystery and honestly one of the least understood wild cattle species on Earth. Lowland anoa are endemic to the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, standing only 70 to 90 cm at the shoulder, roughly the height of a large dog, and weighing between 150 and 300 kilos. Their horns are short and straight, pointing back from their heads, and their coat is dark brown or black. Anoa look almost prehistoric, like miniature versions of ancient cattle ancestors, which makes sense because island isolation tends to shrink large animals over evolutionary time, a phenomenon called island dwarfism. These animals are incredibly secretive, living deep in tropical lowland forests where observation is nearly impossible. Most of what we know about lowland anoa comes from brief sightings, camera traps, and unfortunately, animals killed by hunters. They're solitary or live in extremely small groups, unlike most other cattle that form large herds. This makes them even harder to study and means population estimates are largely guesswork. Both lowland and their mountain cousins are endangered, threatened by habitat loss from logging and agricultural expansion, and hunting pressure despite legal protection. The real challenge with anoa conservation is that we simply don't know enough about their behavior, population numbers, or habitat needs to design effective protection strategies. What makes lowland anoa special is how evolution miniaturized the cattle template to fit an island environment. They're excellent swimmers, moving between coastal areas and interior forests, and they can navigate steep, densely forested terrain that would be impossible for larger cattle. Watching one disappear into the shadows of a Sulawesi rainforest, you're seeing one of nature's most successful vanishing acts. An animal that survives by being almost impossible to find. Mountain anoa, the Highland Phantom and the second act of Sulawesi's miniature cattle story. Mountain anoa are even smaller than their lowland relatives, standing 60 to 80 centimeters at the shoulder and weighing between 150 and 250 kilograms. They are the smallest wild cattle species on Earth, adapted to higher elevations on Sulawesi, where cooler temperatures and different vegetation created evolutionary pressure for a slightly different form. Their horns are similar to lowland anoa, short and straight, but mountain anoa tend to have woollier coats to handle the cooler mountain climate. They inhabit forests at elevations between 1,000 and 2,500 meters, where mist clings to mountainsides and visibility drops to meters. Like their lowland cousins, they're solitary and extremely shy, making them nearly impossible to observe in the wild. Here's what makes mountain anoa particularly heartbreaking. We know even less about them than lowland anoa. Population estimates are uncertain. Threats are similar but compounded by higher altitude habitat loss, and conservation efforts struggle because you can't protect what you can't find or count. They represent one of the great unknowns in modern zoology, a large mammal living in the 21st century, about which we understand almost nothing. Mountain anoa face the same threats as their lowland relatives: deforestation, hunting, and agricultural conversion. But they also face a unique challenge. Mountain habitats are naturally more fragmented, creating isolated populations with limited genetic exchange. Each mountain population becomes its own genetic island, vulnerable to local extinction. What makes mountain anoa truly special is their existence as a parallel evolutionary experiment. Take the same ancestral cattle stock, place it on an island, let it adapt to lowlands and highlands separately, and you get two distinct species solving similar problems in slightly different ways. Their evolution's twin studies, miniature cattle shaped by isolation and environment, into something completely unique. Mountain anoa represent what we stand to lose when we destroy habitats, before we understand what lives there. A species existing quietly in the mountains, asking nothing, and disappearing before we ever learned their story. If you want to see more species explained, click the video on screen now and subscribe.